My name's Marcus, and I'm 23 years old. I work as a landscaper in Seattle, Washington, spending my days trimming hedges, planting seasonal flowers, and maintaining the sprawling yards of people who have more money than they know what to do with. It's not glamorous work. My hands are calloused, my boots are perpetually caked with mud, and I'm usually exhausted by the time I clock out, but it pays the bills and keeps me moving forward. That's all I can ask for these days. I live in a small, weathered cottage on the outskirts of the city, tucked away on a quiet street where the houses are spaced far enough apart that you can pretend you're alone in the world if you want to. The place belonged to my grandparents, passed down to me after they died in a boating accident 7 years ago. I was 16 when it happened, barely old enough to process the loss, let alone take on the responsibility of a house. But my parents had already passed when I was 12. My mom to cancer, my dad to a heart attack 2 years later, so my grandparents were all I had left. When they were gone, I inherited the cottage, and I've been here ever since, trying to make it feel like home instead of just a structure filled with memories I can't quite escape. The cottage isn't much to look at. The white paint is peeling in long strips, the front porch sags in the middle, and the roof leaks when it rains hard enough. There's a small shed out back where I keep my tools and work on my project. A 1976 Ford pickup truck that hasn't run in about 5 years. I bought it off Craigslist for $500, thinking I'd have it running in a few months. That was 3 years ago. Now it sits there, engine half disassembled. A monument to my ambition and lack of follow-through. But I keep at it, spending my evenings out there with the radio playing old classic rock, losing myself in the work. It's meditative, in a way. When I'm under the hood, wrestling with a stubborn bolt or trying to figure out why the fuel line won't seal properly. I'm not thinking about the empty house or the fact that I'm alone. I'm just there, present, focused. Most of my days blur together in a predictable rhythm. I wake up around 6, throw on my work jeans and a flannel shirt, grab a quick breakfast, usually cereal or a granola bar, and head out to whatever job site I'm assigned to that day. The company I work for handles a dozen properties around Seattle, from modest suburban homes to estates that could double as hotels. I spend 8 or 9 hours mowing, weeding, mulching, whatever needs doing, then come home to a microwave dinner and the hum of the radio in the shed. Rinse and repeat. It's not a bad life exactly. It's just quiet, sometimes too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing, your own thoughts, the way the house creaks and settles at night like it's trying to remind you that you're the only one there. I don't have many friends. I had a girlfriend once, back in high school, but that fizzled out after graduation when she went off to college and I stayed behind to deal with the cottage and my grandparents' estate. We tried the long-distance thing for a few months, but it didn't work. She met someone else, someone with a future that looked brighter than mine, and that was that. I don't blame her. I wasn't exactly boyfriend material back then. Grieving, broke, and stuck in a house that felt more like a tomb than a home. Since then, I've kept to myself. It's easier that way. Less complicated. Less risk of getting hurt. That December night started like any other. It was cold, the kind of damp, biting cold that Seattle does so well, and sleet had been falling steadily since dusk, tapping against the shed roof like 1,000 tiny fingers. I was out there working on the truck, trying to loosen a carburetor bolt that had rusted itself into place. The single overhead bulb flickered occasionally, casting erratic shadows across the workbench, and the radio was playing some Springsteen song I'd heard a million times. It was pushing midnight when I heard it. A soft, hesitant knock at the back door. I froze, wrench still in hand. Nobody comes to my house. I don't get visitors, don't have friends who drop by unannounced, and deliveries always come to the front door. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it, but then it came again, a little louder this time, more insistent. I set down the wrench, wiped my greasy hands on a rag, and headed toward the house, my boots crunching on the gravel path. When I opened the back door, I found a woman standing there, and she looked like she'd been through hell. She was maybe in her early 40s, with dark hair that hung in wet, tangled strands around her face. Her coat, expensive-looking, the kind of tailored wool that probably cost more than my monthly rent, was soaked through and streaked with mud. Her eyes were wide, hazel-colored, and filled with something raw and desperate. Fear, maybe, or exhaustion, or both. She didn't have a purse, no umbrella, nothing. Just herself, shivering in the cold. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice shaking but determined, like she was forcing herself to stay composed. "I know this is strange, showing up like this, but please, can I come in? My car broke down about a mile up the road, and my phone's dead." I didn't know where else to go. I stood there for a moment trying to process. She didn't look dangerous, but I'm not the kind of guy who just invites strangers into his house, especially not at midnight. Still, there was something about her. The way she stood there, soaking wet and trembling, the way her eyes held mine like she was silently begging me not to turn her away, that made it impossible to say no. "Yeah, okay," I said, stepping aside. "Come in. You're freezing." She nodded, a small, relieved smile flickering across her face as she stepped past me into the warmth of the house. The back door led directly into the kitchen, and I could see her taking it all in. The chipped countertops, the mismatched chairs around the small table, the stack of unopened mail I'd been ignoring for weeks. She looked out of place here, like a piece of fine art hung in a thrift store. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I'm Diana." "Marcus," I replied, grabbing a clean towel from the linen closet and handing it to her. "Here, dry off. I'll make you some tea or something. You want to sit down?" She took the towel gratefully and moved toward the small living room, sinking onto the old couch with a sigh that sounded like it came from somewhere deep inside her. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then dug through the cupboard until I found a box of chamomile tea that had probably been there for years. While the water heated, I glanced back at her. She was rubbing the towel over her hair, her hands shaking slightly, and I noticed for the first time that she wasn't wearing a wedding ring, or rather, there was a faint tan line where one had been. "So," I said, leaning against the counter, "car trouble?" She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Yeah, I was driving back from my lake house, and, I don't know, everything just fell apart. The engine started making this horrible noise, and then it just died. I pulled over, but I couldn't get it to start again. And then my phone died, and I realized I was in the middle of nowhere." She paused, her voice catching slightly. "I'm sorry for barging in like this. I saw your light on and I didn't know what else to do." "Don't apologize," I said, pouring the hot water into a mug and dropping in a tea bag. "You did the right thing. It's not safe out there this late, especially in this weather." I handed her the mug, and she wrapped her hands around it like it was a lifeline. "Thank you," she said again, her eyes meeting mine. "You have no idea how much this means." We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint hiss of the radiator in the corner. I didn't know what to say, didn't know how to make small talk with a stranger who'd shown up on my doorstep in the middle of the night. But she seemed content just to sit there, warming up, and I was fine with that. After a while, she spoke again, her voice softer now. "I live across town, in one of the gated communities near Bellevue. My husband, well, my soon-to-be ex-husband, I guess, he called while I was driving. We got into an argument, and I was so upset I had to pull over. That's when the car died." She laughed, a bitter sound. "Perfect timing, right?" "Sounds rough," I said, not sure what else to offer. "It is," she admitted. "But honestly, right now, I'm just grateful to be somewhere warm and safe. So thank you, Marcus. Really." I nodded, feeling awkward under the weight of her gratitude. "You can stay here tonight. I've got a guest room, it's not much, but it's got a bed. I'll help you figure out your car situation in the morning." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a second, I thought she might cry, but she blinked them back and nodded. "Thank you." I didn't know where else to go. As I showed her to the guest room and said goodnight, her voice stopped me at the door. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I'm glad it was your door I knocked on." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and left her there, closing the door softly behind me. As I lay in bed that night, listening to the sleet tap against the window, I couldn't shake the image of her standing on my doorstep, desperate, vulnerable, and utterly out of place in my small, broken-down world. The next morning, I woke to pale winter light filtering through the blinds and the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. For a moment, I thought I dreamed the whole thing. The knock at the door, the woman with the haunted eyes, all of it. But then I heard movement downstairs, the soft clink of a mug being set on the counter, and I knew it was real. I pulled on a clean shirt and headed down to find Diana standing in my kitchen, looking almost surreal in the morning light. She'd changed out of her muddy coat and was wearing what looked like a spare sweater she must have found in the guest room closet. One of my grandmother's old cardigans, too big for her but somehow fitting in a way that made her look less like the polished woman from last night and more like someone who belonged here. Her hair was still damp but combed back, and she'd washed the mud from her face. She looked tired but more composed, like she'd had time to pull herself together. "Morning," she said, offering a small smile. "I hope you don't mind. I found the coffee and helped myself. I figured it was the least I could do." "No, that's fine," I said, pouring myself a mug. "You sleep okay?" "Better than I have in weeks, honestly." She leaned against the counter, wrapping her hands around her mug. "That guest room is cozy." It felt safe. We stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping our coffee. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional drip from the leaky faucet I kept meaning to fix. It should have been awkward, two strangers sharing coffee in a cramped kitchen. But it wasn't. It felt oddly natural, like we'd done this 100 times before. "I called a tow company," she said after a while. "They're going to pick up my car this morning and take it to a shop. I hope that's okay. I used your address as a reference point." "That's fine," I said. "You need a ride anywhere after that?" She hesitated, stirring her coffee absently. "I should probably head home, but honestly, I'm not in a rush. My husband, Richard, he's probably still furious, and I'm not ready to deal with that yet." She looked up at me, her hazel eyes searching. "Would it be okay if I stayed a little longer? Just for the morning?" "Yeah, of course," I said, surprised by how much I meant it. "Stay as long as you need." We ended up sitting at the small kitchen table, eating toast and scrambled eggs I threw together from what little I had in the fridge. Diana ate slowly, methodically, like she was savoring every bite. I asked her about herself, and she opened up in a way that felt both unexpected and deeply personal. She told me she'd been married to Richard Chun for 22 years. He was a tech billionaire, one of those names you see in Forbes articles and business magazines. They'd met when they were young. She was an art student, he was a startup founder, and for a while it had been good. But as his company grew, so did his need for control. He dictated where they lived, who she could see, what she could do. "He's not violent," she said quietly, staring into her mug. "But he's suffocating. Everything has to be his way." I stopped being Diana years ago. I became Richard Chen's wife, and that's all I was allowed to be. "That sounds horrible," I said, and I meant it. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "It is. Our son, Jake, he's your age, 23. He's away at graduate school in California, studying environmental science. He's the only good thing that came out of that marriage. But even he doesn't know how bad it's gotten. I've hidden it from him because I didn't want him to worry." "Why now?" I asked gently. "Why leave last night?" She took a shaky breath. "Because I couldn't take it anymore. Richard and I had a fight yesterday afternoon. He wanted me to cancel a photography exhibition I've been planning. Just a small thing at a local gallery, nothing major. But it was mine, you know? Something I was doing for myself. And he said it was embarrassing, that it made him look bad to have his wife playing artist. That's what he called it, playing." Her voice cracked, and she wiped at her eyes angrily. I couldn't stay there another second. So I got in the car and left. I didn't even have a plan. I just drove. I didn't know what to say to that. So I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back, holding on like I was the only solid thing in her world. After breakfast, I offered to show her the shed, thinking it might distract her. She followed me out back, stepping carefully over the uneven ground. And when I opened the door, she let out a small laugh. "Wow," she said, looking around at the cluttered space. Tools hanging on pegboards, the disassembled truck in the center, oil-stained rags scattered everywhere. This is very you. What's that supposed to mean? We fell into a rhythm. She'd sit on an old stool in the shed, watching me work on the truck, asking questions about carburetors and fuel pumps. I taught her how to change a tire one afternoon, laughing when she got grease on her cheek and swore like a sailor. We'd cook together in the evenings. Simple meals, nothing fancy. And she'd tell me stories about Jake, about the life she used to have before Richard's billions turned everything cold and transactional. One night, she brought her camera and took photos of the cottage, the shed, the truck. "This place has character," she said, framing a shot of the peeling paint on the porch. "It feels alive. It's falling apart," I countered. "Same thing," she said with a grin. Slowly, the cottage started to feel different. Less empty. Her laughter filled the spaces that had been silent for so long, and I found myself looking forward to her visits, counting down the hours until I'd hear her knock at the door. She brought light into my world, and I think I brought something into hers too. Freedom, maybe, or just a place where she could breathe. One evening, we were sitting on the porch, sharing a bottle of wine she'd brought, watching the rain fall in sheets across the yard. She turned to me, her expression serious. "Marcus," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." "Okay," I said, my chest tightening. "Being here with you, it's the first time in years I've felt like myself. Not Richard's wife, not Jake's mom, just Diana." She paused, her eyes searching mine. "I know this is complicated. I know I'm still technically married, and I'm twice your age, and this whole thing is probably a mess. But I can't pretend anymore. Care about you. More than I should." My heart pounded as I set down my glass. "Diana, You don't have to say anything," she interrupted. "I just needed you to know." But I did have something to say. "I care about you too," I admitted, my voice rough. "I've been trying not to, but I do. You make this place feel like home again." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, and leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat there in the rain-soaked quiet, holding onto each other like we were both afraid to let go. That night, everything shifted. We didn't talk about the future or make promises we couldn't keep. We just existed together, in the warmth of the cottage, in the quiet understanding that whatever this was, it mattered. The weeks that followed felt like living in a dream I was afraid to wake up from. Diana became a constant presence in my life, her visits stretching from hours to entire days, and eventually to nights when she'd text Richard some excuse about staying with a friend. We both knew we were crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed, but neither of us seemed capable of stopping. The cottage transformed around us. Her photography books stacked on the coffee table, her spare clothes hanging in my closet, her toothbrush next to mine in the bathroom. It was domestic and intimate and terrifying all at once. We'd spend mornings tangled in my bed, talking about everything and nothing. She'd tell me about her dreams of opening her own gallery someday, and I'd share my fantasy of starting a restoration shop, fixing up classic cars for people who actually appreciated them. In those quiet moments, with sunlight streaming through the blinds and her head resting on my chest, the rest of the world felt impossibly far away. Richard, the billions, the age difference, none of it mattered when it was just us. But reality has a way of creeping back in, no matter how hard you try to keep it at bay. It was a Thursday afternoon in late January when everything came to a head. The sky was heavy with clouds, threatening rain but not quite delivering, and I'd taken the afternoon off work to help Diana set up for her photography exhibition. It was happening that weekend at a small gallery in the University District, and she was a nervous wreck about it. We'd spent hours at the cottage the night before, going through her prints, helping her decide which ones to display. She'd chosen 20 images, moody Seattle landscapes, candid street photography, and a few shots she'd taken around my property. There was one of the shed at dusk, the single bulb inside casting a warm glow through the doorway that made my chest ache every time I looked at it. We were in the gallery, hanging the last few prints, when Diana's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "It's Richard," she said quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she held the phone. "You don't have to answer it," I said, stepping closer. But she did. She always did. "Hello." Her voice was steady, controlled, the same tone I'd heard her use when talking about her marriage. Detached, like she was reading from a script. Yes, I'm at the gallery. No, I told you about this weeks ago. Richard, we've been through this. I watched her face change as he spoke, saw the way her jaw tightened, her eyes hardening. Whatever he was saying, it wasn't good. That's not fair, she said, her voice rising slightly. Jake is an adult. You can't just… No, I'm not doing this anymore. She paused, listening, and then her face crumbled. You're threatening me? After everything, you're going to threaten me. I moved closer, wanting to help but not knowing how. She looked at me, her eyes wet with tears, and I saw something break in her expression. I want a divorce, she said into the phone, her voice shaking but firm. I'm done, Richard. I'm filing papers next week. Because I'm not happy. Because I haven't been happy in years. Because I'd rather have nothing than spend one more day in that prison you call a marriage. There was a long silence as she listened to his response. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. Fine. Take everything. I don't care. She ended the call and stood there, phone clutched in her hand, her whole body shaking. Diana, I said softly, reaching for her. She turned to me, and suddenly she was in my arms, sobbing against my chest. I held her tight, feeling her tears soak through my shirt, and whispered that everything would be okay even though I had no idea if it would be. He knows, she said when she could finally speak. He hired someone to follow me. He knows about you, about us. He said he's going to destroy me. Take Jake away from me somehow. Make sure I end up with nothing. He can't do that, I said, though I wasn't sure if it was true. Men like Richard Chun had power I couldn't even imagine. He can try, she said, pulling back to look at me. Her makeup was streaked, her eyes red, but there was something fierce in her expression now. But I meant what I said. I'm done. I'm filing for divorce, and whatever happens, happens. I can't live like that anymore, Marcus. I won't. We finished hanging the exhibition in silence, both of us processing what had just happened. When we were done, we went back to the cottage and just held each other on the couch. Not talking, not making plans, just being together in the quiet. That night, Diana told me everything. About how Richard had become increasingly controlling over the years, monitoring her bank accounts, her phone, her movements. About how he'd isolated her from her friends, convinced her that no one else would want her, that she was lucky to have him. About how she'd started to believe it, until she knocked on my door that December night and remembered what it felt like to be seen as a person instead of a possession. I should have left years ago, she said, her voice raw. But I was scared. Scared of being alone. Scared of losing Jake. Scared of what people would think. But now… She looked at me, her hazel eyes intense. Now I'm more scared of losing myself. Of losing this. Of losing you. You're not going to lose me, I said, meaning it with everything I had. Whatever happens, I'm here. She kissed me then, desperate and hungry, like she was trying to prove to herself that this was real, that I was real. We made love that night with an urgency we hadn't had before, both of us clinging to each other like the world was ending and this was all we had left. The next few days were a blur. Diana moved most of her things to the cottage, claiming she needed space from Richard while the divorce proceedings started. Her lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer who specialized in high-profile divorces, warned her that Richard would fight dirty, that he'd try to drag her through the mud, make her look unstable or unfit. But Diana was resolute. She'd rather lose everything than go back. The photography exhibition opened that Saturday, and despite everything, it was beautiful. Diana stood in the gallery surrounded by her work, talking to strangers about her process, her vision, and I watched from the corner feeling a strange mix of pride and fear. This was her moment, her chance to be Diana again, and I was terrified that Richard would find some way to ruin it. He didn't show up at the gallery, but his presence was felt anyway. Halfway through the opening, Diana got a text from Jake. Her son had been contacted by Richard's lawyers, asking him to testify about his mother's erratic behavior and abandonment of family responsibilities. Jake had refused, told them to go to hell, and called his mother immediately to let her know he was on her side. Diana cried when she read his message, relief and gratitude washing over her. But the relief was short-lived. On Monday morning, for days after her confrontation with Richard, Diana got a call from Jennifer. Richard was offering a settlement, a lump sum of $2 million, significantly less than what she was entitled to under Washington state law, in exchange for a quick, quiet divorce.